Hey, DeucesCracked members, this is Nowhere Man and Delcross B, and we are here with episode 7 of Deuce Island. And for this episode, we've got Kevin playing some shallow stack tables. So, obviously, there are going to be some adjustments that you're going to have to make when we transition from 100 big blind tables to these are 50 big blind tables here on Stars. So, I'm going to let Kevin go ahead and do his thing and explain to you everything you need to know about shallow stack tables in like 3 minutes or less. Go.
Okay. So first of all, we're playing shallow stack. A lot of the edge here is gonna come from getting deep with like players who are just bad at playing shallow. So if you look like on the table on my left, for example, I'm actually, I have a player who's 72 big blinds deep, immediately to my right. I'm actually looking to gamble it up a little bit here so that I can maybe get a bigger stack to play a big pot against this guy. I mean, it's not even going to be that big of a pot, but I just think that when people get used to playing 50 big blind stacks, it puts them into awkward stack to pot ratio decisions on later streets. You'll even see early on, I make a mistake with a hand. Where, I just sort of lose track of like how much stack depth I'm going to have behind. But so the other thing is, when the stacks are shorter, there's a lot more value in stealing the blinds.
Yeah.
So I loosen up my opening range quite a bit, and I open for smaller because, like I said, there's more value in just stealing the blinds here. So I tend to open to 2.5. If I were playing on full tilt and I had the half pot button, I would
Yeah.
probably open to 2.25.
But that's a
Just
lot of typing.
because, yeah, it's a lot of typing. So I just type in 2.5 every time. And then because I'm making such a small investment, I'm basically just playing my hand. Like if I get three bet, I'm folding quite a bit. Relative to what you would normally expect, especially out of position. Just because I'm opening a lot of hands where when I come to the flop, I'm very often either going to have to check fold or get it in as a flip or worse against their range. So you'll see me like open some pretty marginal hands and then just give up to a three bet because my investment is pretty small. And then if I do opt to play a three bet pot, I'm going to essentially treat it more like a four bet pot.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that their range is going to be, I think that against bad players, a three betting range is typically more heavily skewed toward aces to begin with. So in these shorter stack games where, I think that the sort of the word on the street is that people play them not as well as the 100 big blind tables, um, for various reasons. And so I'm treating a lot of four bets or a lot of three bets as if they were like a four bet.
Well,
Now that's
SPR wise, that probably makes a lot of sense, I would say.
exactly. If I flop a pair and a gutter in a three bet pot, I'm going with it. So I'd rather flop, I'd rather just take hands that flop well than play, a relatively big pot, to the relative to the stack sizes than, get into weird spots post flop. There's just not a lot of value in protecting my opening range when I'm just going to be opening so much. And I'm gonna start four betting a lot, or three betting and four betting a lot lighter myself. Hands like even like trip aces, trip kings, like that I normally just find to be completely unplayable at 100 big blind stacks. Actually go way up in value in a 50 big blind game just because I can get in, half of my stack to a
Yeah.
three bet or a third of my stack to a three bet. And so I'm gonna be playing a lot of my kings type hand, like my weak kings, as if they were, aces. That or at least I should be. I do end up. You'll see me flat here in this video with aces and kings a couple times, and in retrospect, I don't really like that play that much. I think that I should be three betting a lot of those hands, just
Mhm.
because the value of flopping a set is greatly diminished.
Yeah.
Um, so what you should be aware of when you come into these games is that they're going to be more high variance. You're going to basically just be looking to push equity edges,
Yay,
and so a
higher.
lot of that is going to come from just good hand starting requirements, or the ability to sort of, realize what's like how people at your table are playing and adjust. I felt like people were playing pretty tight at these tables, so I end up opening a lot of hands and,
And by a lot, he means like 70%.
Yeah, I do play. I play quite a few hands in this video, which is good. I mean, I get myself into some interesting post flop situations, and
Yeah,
by and large, I think I managed to play them pretty well.
yeah,
So it was a good chance to sort of loosen up. Obviously, position is some. I mean, it's still important at a shallow table, but it's less important
right.
because there's less stack behind. So a lot of my plays that I like to make, like I have a pretty well constructed like theory of donk betting, for example. And that pretty much all just goes out the window. Thank you. In a situation like this where, I don't have the stack depth to like fire multiple barrels or make credible bluffs. So mostly I'm what you're going to see me doing is I'm going to start semi-bluffing a lot lighter. I'm going to be pushing any sort of marginal equity edge a lot harder, and I'm going to be trying to put a lot of pressure on the blinds and pick up the dead money whenever possible.
Okay, so I have a couple questions to follow up on the stuff that you mentioned. One, what's your main adjustment going to be to someone who actually recognizes the fact that you are opening a lot and three bets you a bunch in position?
I'm gonna start four betting them pretty wide, in
Mm,
fact. Like I don't mind, if their adjustment is to three bet me a lot, then I'm willing to ramp up the variance with them. Or I'm gonna in if it seems like they're just gonna throw it back at me and just stick it in pretty wide, at that point I will either tighten up my opening range or just move tables. I mean,
mhm,
there's enough tables here that it's not really worth it to get into a variance war with someone when I can go find, basically all of the like I looked at a couple tables before I sat down, and all of the tables were just loaded with bad players. So
yeah.
I wasn't too concerned.
So I think that actually brings up a pretty cool point. Um, there is, I feel like there's a, well, for one, there's a huge, ego thing for a lot of people. Like, I can't get up from a table unless it's filled with nits or whatever. Like, me leaving the table because some guy is three betting me all over the place, that, shows weakness or whatever. And I don't really think that's the case at all. Like, there can definitely be times where a guy can be on your left and he's not necessarily an awesome player. He's just going to make your life really, really difficult. Um, and there's a big difference between that and some guy that's, very solid, that's three betting you, just enough on your left or whatever. If this guy's like 40-30 and three betting all the time, and there's not really a whole lot you can do about it, and
Right.
there's much better seats on other tables, like, go ahead and get up. That's, no one, the goal of the game is to win money, so don't
Yeah.
feel any particular need to like fight it out against this guy and wave your e-peen or whatever, because it's just, it's not really worth it in the end.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally speaking, I kind of had like an 8 buy-in downswing session a night or two ago, and I was playing Rush PLO 100 with one play, and it was basically all to one player where he was three betting something like 22% or something. I ended up
Love
looking
those
back.
guys.
Yeah, and he would c bet like any flop basically for pot if it was heads up, and then stack off with any pair. And that's fine, and I got it in as an 80-20 a bunch of times, and like I got it in flipping a couple times, and I just lost all of those times. And I mean, in the long run, that's fine, but I'm gonna make money there. But for the next like day or two, I was like, wow, that was just painful. So I mean, sometimes like there's a psychological toll
Yeah.
that you should be aware of when if you're going to play in a ramped up variance situation. If I were playing at a lower stake than this, and like if I were playing 50, PLO 50 half stacked, then I'm completely willing to just blast through variance. Or even this doesn't like any stake that I'm comfortably like overrolled for, I don't mind just ramping up the variance and looking to play against these very aggressive players. And I think that's fine. But if you're in a situation where you're not like fully comfortable with the stakes yet, moving tables is almost always going to be your best bet.
Yeah.
So
And this obviously, at least speaks a lot towards proper bankroll management and all that stuff, but that's for another series. So the two other things I wanted to hit on quick before we get started. One, would you say that these tables are more profitable than, say, the cap tables on full tilt, where you're always playing 30 BBs, or it's 40 BBs, I
it's
think,
40
on full
BBs.
tilt? Yeah.
In my experience, well, so Cat PLO is kind of a different beast just because there's no value to taking a gambly spot to
Hmm.
double your stack to then have, to then be deep with someone in position on you.
Yeah, that particular scenario is the one I was thinking about actually.
Right. And cat PLO itself, people tend to play it a little better at at any sort of reasonable stake.
Hmm.
PLO, people are just going to, cat PLO is not a particularly difficult game to play in the sense that if you recognize equities, people aren't going to be making huge mistakes versus you. And the amount of money that you put in as a substantial equity favorite is going to be a lot less. And so necessarily the game is going to be a higher variance game.
Yeah.
Like even if you always, like you basically never play rivers in Cat PLO against aggressive players. Unless it's like, you check it down or something.
Yeah.
Um, so your ability to get money in as like a 100% favorite goes way down, and so that sort of will just ramp up your variance quite a bit. So I suppose that I somewhat prefer the 50 big the short stack tables to the
Hmm.
cap kilo tables.
Just
Just
because
and
you have that opportunity to eventually get deep with someone and then, watch them play terribly in that sense.
Yeah, and I also somewhat expect I've noticed that, in my experience playing cap, you usually have like a couple people who are decent cap PLO players. And in the 50 big blind games, it seems like there's just a lot of sort of gambly fish. And that's kind of the best spot to be in my opinion.
Yeah. Cool.
So,
There was one other thing I wanted to ask about. But I may have forgotten it already, so I'm not going to worry about it. If I remember it
okay,
during the video, we'll talk about it. But anyway, let's actually see what happens here.
sure.
So do you remember offhand what your notes are on these two guys here, just so we can talk about them right off the
Sure.
bat?
Y Manilow, I noticed that he was just calling very light, and Emery A, I think was basically the same sort of note. At one point, I think I even changed Y Manilow to be green, which is sort of my indication of a weaker player.
Hmm.
Um, so on the flop on the left, I think that he's going to c-bet this board with 100% of his range, and check fold just a ton of turns. So I think that this is, and the thing is, I can also turn a lot of equity on various turn cards. On an eight, a queen,
Yeah.
a king, a jack, a nine, even a seven. I pick up a lot of equity versus range, and I just
Heart.
think that if he has a 10, yeah, heart. So it may look like kind of a weird spot to just call with essentially nothing, but I think that this spot like that, I float there maybe too much, and I sort of didn't give this guy credit to be able to just two barrel air. I figured if he had, he's going to check fold turns a lot, and he just did. So I thought that was fine. Um, especially when the board is dry like this, I sort of look to, peel a street or two. So I thought
I
that,
I also think on this particular board it helps that like the one super obvious draw that you could have hit,
mhm,
so that really helps your ability to just bet when he checks here. Because I think if he has aces or something like that, or any a 10, whatever, and the turn is like a 7 or an
mhm,
8 or a 9 or anything like that, I think he's way less likely to check fold. But here on
yeah.
the 6, it's like,
Well,
hey, look, 4-5 got there.
what I wasn't even really thinking about that. What I was more like aware of was the fact that there's just no, like, if he has a pair of twos or a pair of threes, he does not like his hand. Like, he's just betting to continuation bet.
Yeah.
And there's, a lot of the hand, like, he wasn't opening a ton in this spot. I had been playing at this table for a little while.
Okay.
And there's just not a lot of hands that he can have here that's going to peel. So he's going to fold, all, like, I mean, even if he opens like a lot of pairs here, like nine, he's going to fold nines through, fours if he opened them to one bet on the turn. He's going to fold a lot of just like random, like four overcard hands here, or,
Oh yeah.
like a couple overcards to the 10. So when the board comes like 2, 3, 10, like he either has a 10 or he doesn't. And if he has a 10, he's probably going to bet again. If he check called the turn, then he had a 10 for sure. But in this case, he just has nothing. And when the board is super low like that, it's really easy to sort of, you know, recognize that your opponent doesn't have any real value hands in his range.
Yeah.
and just sort of move them off on a later street. So I thought that was a pretty trivial float. So,
Yeah, especially I mean, you know, I think even though we're floating here a lot, we have a ton of backdoor
mhm,
potential. So that's really, I
yeah,
think for me, like I'm always looking to have the more backdoor flush draw, straight draw, two pair draw, whatever good stuff like that I can have, the
yeah,
more likely I am to do this kind of thing. So this seems like a pretty good spot overall, adding the, dryness of the board and that he can't really have much other than like 10 deuce.
right. Um, so I on the left-hand table, I'm also going to just complete in the small blind with some hands and then just look to basically make a hand out of position. I'm not, this player, Waimanalo, wasn't really giving me a hard time. So I was okay with just limping in there with some, weakish hands that have good hit potential because I felt like if I flop a set, he's going to pay me off for at least two streets. And I can sometimes just continuation bet and go on. I don't expect him to make any moves post flop, so I felt like my play in this hand was, my play here is to just sort of limp and then see what the board brings.
Seems pretty standard. I mean, would you do this? Would you play this much differently in a six max game? Would you raise this normally
No,
against a
well,
similar player?
but against a player who I think is going to raise me here a lot, I'm going to fold this hand.
Yeah, okay, okay.
And so that's sort of where the difference, especially with the stack sizes. When I'm shallow, the hand like this has a lot less value.
Yeah.
So I end up checking, and then I bet the turn when I pick up a gutter. I'm not
It's for
really
value at this
expecting.
point, really.
Yeah, I think it's for value. And then when the river pairs the two, I I think that I can bet for value and get called by like a nine or a ten here. So I end up betting.
Nine? That seems
Mhm.
kind of optimistic. A 10 I can see. I don't think a nine's
I think that
too
this guy was loose enough that well, I mean, like he's gonna call me with
pretty
with a
loose.
lot of counterfeit two pair now. Like I think he would call with 9-5 or 9-10, of course.
Mhm.
And he's just gonna like I think he's gonna call the turn with almost any pair.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so the river ends up being a little interesting.
Do you
So
think
I
he's
did
too
have the
passive to check call or to for do you think he is too passive for you to check call?
uh I think that there's more value in betting here.
Okay.
I don't think that he's gonna bet as a bluff. I think that his range here is mostly pair type hands, especially when I have two queens in my hand.
Hmm.
It takes away a lot of the jack queen type combos that he could have and makes his range. I mean, and his range is just so wide here that I'm not sure that I can get value. And it looks like the vast majority of his range is going to be some sort of one pairish type hand.
Hmm.
So I think that check calling here, like if I were to check, I think it'd be a check fold.
Really?
Um,
You don't think he turns like I mean, because he checked the flop like hearts and 8, 7, 8, and I mean Queen Jack is obviously discounted because you've got two queens in your hand, but I think there's a ton of draws that he can still have here.
I think he's gonna just check them and expect to give up on the pot. In
Okay.
all honesty, like I
Okay.
think that this is one of those passive players who's just
If
gonna
he's that
check and give
passive,
up.
then okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
like I don't, I think that I could check call, but I would expect to see a better hand a decent amount of the time.
Hmm.
Like I don't, he's not gonna bet 9-10. He's not. I mean,
Yeah.
like he might bet jacks, and that would be like the only hand that like I might end up, folding incorrectly to. But if he has kings or even aces, like which I do put in his range still, um, not a ton of combos, but I think that it's still possible he can have aces or a two here because it's a limped pot. Like he can have any four cards.
Hmm.
I think that it's reasonable that I'm beat. Now, when he raises the river, I think it's a pretty trivial fold.
Yeah.
He's got a two here like every time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I thought that was fine. Um, again, so I bet fold, and I think that that's better than calling for the most part. Because I think that I'm gonna
I
get
think given your
called.
description, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna get called there in spots. So yeah. On the right, I make kind of a high, yeah. So I think I end up making a high variance play. Uh, I have a flush draw, a gut shot, and a backdoor flush draw. Um,
That's plenty.
yeah. So this guy raises, and this is a lot of. I mean, like objectively, like I have to call the 1960 and then stick another 35 in, but um. So I have the gut shot, I have the flush draw, I have the backdoor flush draw, and like if we think about his range here, like if he has a hand like Queen 9, I'm doing fine. Like I just have so many outs versus that hand. But I can be getting it in here like really good. He can have a hand like 6, 7, 8 with dominated hearts and decide to raise, and I'm gonna get it in really good with King High.
Yeah.
Um,
Now is
and
that's more a function of the shallow table, right? Than it
right.
is because I don't necessarily think that's the case at a 100 BB table.
No, but here, like the shallower you are, the more value there is in being able to semi-bluff your hand.
Right.
And so I expect this guy to just have like he's gonna have like a pretty wide range. And I think that being able to rate like just go with a hand like this is fine. I even, if he even if he has like a fairly strong like like I think that if he has like Queen 9 or a set here, I have a flush draw, a gut shot, a backdoor flush draw, a backdoor straight draw. I think that that's enough to just be fine with going with my hand. Um, you know, so I do, and I think he ends up with a very strong hand, but I get
We
there.
get there. Yeah, he
Yes.
had top set and pair to go with it.
Yeah. So I mean, it's high variance, and that's sort of what I mean when I was talking about like your ability to make money off of bad players is diminished in a table like this because I'm, like he's, like so let's say that like let's say that my play we consider my play to be bad here, right? The amount of money that he gets in good is just not that much.
Yeah,
He's not going to be able to, and he's not going to be able to fold me off of like hands with a decent amount of equity. I didn't run the equity here, but I think I have to have at least
30
like
something.
I think it's like high 30s and maybe even
Yeah.
40% equity with the backdoor flush draw. With the I guess
Yeah,
with
actually
top set,
and he blocks one of his boat outs, so that gives you an extra like 2% probably.
right? So it's
And then blocks it again on the turn. The other thing about getting your money in good is that there's um because you're shallower, everyone is more inclined to get their money in earlier. So there's not this situation where you can get like one pot size bet in on the flop and then get like a bet and a check raise in on the turn or something like that. All the
right,
money gets in when you're 60, 62-38 at worst or something like that, as opposed to on the turn where you can get it in as like an 80-20 or something like that.
right. And so I mean like we kind of consider this to be like the top of his made hand range. If he has a better
Well, yeah.
drawing hand than me, then I'm actually like I can basically like I can be in trouble here if he check raises with like the nut flush draw. But with the gut shot and given that I have a pair like a card over the queen, I think that getting it in here is fine and a backdoor flush draw. So, what I'm more worried about is that he has the nut flush draw here,
Yeah.
and less so that he has top set. But again, I think that there's a lot of times when he can raise here with a lesser made or with a lesser draw and I can get my money in like on the good side of like a 60-40. So stacking off here ends up being fine.
I mean, even just like Jack 10 and a flush draw.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's gonna if he had, especially since I don't have the Jack of Hearts. If he had like Jack 10 of Hearts, he's definitely getting it in there. I think.
Oh, yeah.
With an open-ended straight flush draw for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Good thing we got there.
yeah,
Got to run good to do well at these tables.
Yeah, and that's what I mean is like these are going to be high variance tables. Like it's going to be somewhat difficult to get a lot of money in here. Um, so on the table on the right, or on the left, I'm just going to bet and take it down there. Sometimes at a deeper table or against an aggressive player, I sometimes check.
Sure.
Um,
But not
you know,
against that guy.
yeah, against that guy who I don't like. I think he's basically just playing the absolute strength of his hand. I'm just gonna check and I'm just gonna bet and take it down. There's not really a lot of need to balance in a spot like that when I just don't think he's paying much attention.
Yeah. Well, and in any first session, I don't really think it's worth it to do that kind of stuff anyway. Wait to
Right.
balance until he's seen you, for a few hundred hands or whatever.
Right. So I'm hoping that he's gonna notice that I'm just betting every
Yeah.
flop here. But he doesn't. So that'd be pretty nice if he could have ace five there and just get it in stone dead.
Mm.
But alas,
It's okay. You make up for it in a little bit.
yeah. Um,
So what I finally remembered my other question. Um, what sorts of so at 100 big blind tables, let me pause it for a second because I want to make sure I talk about this. At 100 big blind tables, there's a lot of like standard leaks that a lot of, people that are too passive have, people that are too aggressive have, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, what sort of shallow table specific leaks are you going to be looking for in people that sort of indicate an inability to adjust to the stack sizes properly? And then how will you try to exploit those shallow stack specific weaknesses?
Okay, that was a huge question.
Yeah, that was a lot. Let's start
Yeah.
with the first part. What are the shallow stack specific weaknesses that people are going to exhibit here?
Okay. In shallow stack, you know, like I said, you know, you're not looking, you know, you're not going to be able to put a lot of money in as a huge favorite on any, you know, because, you know, the way that, you know, the times when you can put money in as a big favorite is going to be on the turn and the river.
Right.
And very often you're not playing the turn or the river that too much.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what you need to do is look to just shovel money in the pot when you have an equity edge. And a lot of times that's going to be pre-flop. And now this is even a mistake that I make myself. You know, when you have like strong pre-flop hands, you should be looking to three bet a lot more hands in a shallow table, and you should be way less concerned with balancing your three betting range, like with you know, small rundowns or the like. You can, you know, you can three bet just if you're only three betting big cards. You're really not going to be doing anything particularly wrong.
Mhm. Just
Just
because
be
there's so much stack in the middle at that point, it's not really exploitable.
exactly. Like, I mean, if, you know, if you push like a 60-40 edge pre-flop, I mean, you're necessarily, you know, like, and that's, you know, and you get in a third of your stack, then, you know, it doesn't really take much. And when you have so much of your stack in, if the board, you know, there's a lot of situations where you should just jam with just overcards.
Hmm.
That's another thing that I think people don't do often enough is get it in with just like naked backdoor two pair draw. I mean, or you know what I mean, like like just overcards. Um, I think that people look to play a little like sometimes I see people looking to play a little tricky.
Hmm.
You know, that's usually not the way to go. You know, hands like your low rundowns go way down in value, so play, you know, but at the same time the like playing like a non-nutted hand is less
Of a mistake.
disastrous.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so because like getting draw over draw, like as long as you have like something to go with your draw, it's usually not that big a deal. And you know, people like you need to look to just like semi bluff a lot because really the way that you're going to make the most money is by picking up the pot without a showdown.
Yeah. Getting people to fold.
Yeah. So if you can just, you know, if you can attack people pretty mercilessly and, you know, maybe push some spots where, you know, if you think that you have fold equity and you're on the, you know, but you're on the wrong side of like a 40, you know, you're just going to be on the wrong side of a 40-60 if you get called. It's usually going to be good enough to just shove there because we're going to fold them out often enough. And you know, the times that you know, they call 40% equity is still a lot when you consider like how little fold equity you need to make that play profitable.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, the shorter stack tables should involve a lot more aggression and a lot more and a lot less concern for like having, you know, someone, you know, possibly getting yourself in a bad situation. You're rarely going to be like absolutely crushed. And you know, the time like even when you should like, you know, again, take that like last hand where I had a flush draw and a gut shot. I ran into the top of his range and I still wasn't that bad off.
Yeah.
At that point, you know, when he raises the flop, I recognize that I probably don't have fold equity, but I'm still not gonna fold my hand. So, you know, I would say that in general, people, you should sort of push the action a bit more and just try and make people fold a bit more than you might in the 100 big blind games, just because the value, like, there's no value in slow playing, right? And so
Right. Yeah.
if people are trying to slow play a hand, you know, they're making a mistake, and you know, you're usually like you'll probably like be able to figure out who they are that are, you know, the people that are trying to slow play against you, and usually just sort of give up after like a flop bet or a turn bet. But, you know, there's less room for creativity in the short stack games.
So
So,
here's a that was definitely a lot of cool stuff there. So a related question. You mentioned that the aggression needs to be ramped up in the shallow stack games, and we've talked several times already about the value of winning pots before a showdown. What do you think as a coach and a teacher of using shallow stack games as a part of your students' learning process with regards to that infamous red line and non-showdown winnings. So maybe as a suggestion to people, go play 10, 20, like drop down a level, play 10 or 20,000 hands of shallow stack tables. Go crazy with the aggression because you can never get your money in that bad in that case. And work really hard on trying to find spots where you can get people to fold a lot of equity.
Yeah, I mean, there's merit to that, but at the same time, like a lot of the plays that you would make for fold equity at a shallow stack table are not going to work as well at a
Mm,
deeper stack table
just because
because
you'll have more money behind.
yeah, when there's and the thing about, the deep stack tables is being able to leverage a
A
large bet
future
on the
bet.
turn or the river is a lot scarier than just check raising a flop and not really having any
With eight
money
BBs
behind.
behind.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's value to that. I mean, basically, the way that I sort of like came up in PLO, I played a lot of heads up sit and goes, and those
Mm,
start fairly
yeah.
shallow, and then they just get more shallow. And learning how to adjust your game to different stack sizes and where, you can make big plays and where you need to sort of, slow down is, valuable. So I think that I think that what the shallow stack tables will do is if they'll help you play in three bet pots a little bit better, I think, against people who are wide three betters.
Yeah.
Uh, and what I mean by that is that in a the stack to pot ratio in a shallow stack table ends up being similar to what the stack to pot ratio is going to be in a deep stack table in a three bet pot. And so the value there is learning that, sometimes if you have like very little, it's best to just jam.
Hmm.
Um, and you might not get, it's not necessarily going to be great for your red line because you're going to get called a decent amount. But what it will do is I mean, I guess it will be good for your red line in that you're not going to fold in situations where you
You might
probably
have made
had
a bad
X
fold
to go
before.
with
Yeah.
your hand.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that's sort of a good point. Usually, I prefer to play deep stacked PLO because I can get in more money on a later street
Yeah.
and I have more room for creativity. But in a game like this, I think that just sort of like it's a good spot to learn how to ramp up your aggression for sure. So, um, I sort of think about leading on the left table.
Yeah. I saw that.
I I think that it's debatable. I think that I can, I don't think that the thing is like with a hand like Ace Jack on this board, if I bet twice, I'm never gonna get called by worse. If I bet the flop and the turn, I'm never getting called by worse. So I'm really just sort of doing it for fold equity. But I think that I can bet the turn in the river and potentially get called by worse and give myself a chance to improve a little bit more.
Hmm.
But I think
And you
that
know he's never going to bet the flop himself, really.
yeah, I don't think that he's going to bet the flop without a fairly strong hand. And if he did bet the flop, I would consider folding, in all honesty. I mean, like calling is, I'd probably call, you
Call
know,
one, fold turn,
yeah, just because I think that he's going to have like an ace king type hand a lot.
or better.
And or better, I think that like like if he bets ace king, I would actually be a little surprised. I think that his range for betting the flop is going to be two pair plus.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird, but I might just fold to a flop bet because I don't expect, and the pot's small, there's not really a lot of value in fighting for it, and I don't stand to be able to improve much on turns. I really just have a backdoor flush draw, and I'm not thrilled about that. And if I pick up a jack, it's kind of a reverse implied odds card. And my sevens and eights might not be good if he has ace queen, which who knows how wide this guy's limping.
Six is
So
a great card, though.
yeah, six is a good card because I pick up the gut shot, and I think that it will get him to call me a little bit lighter with a hand like a queen,
Yeah.
because if I turn a flush draw and no pair here, I'm probably going to bet out as well. And so when I do that, I think that I'm in, I think I expect him to
And he's going to
maybe
call with the exact same thing.
right. So, but he just folds, so he had nothing. And then if I don't make two pair on the river, it's kind of close. I'd probably check and then maybe even consider a check fold on the river depending on what comes, just because I don't expect this guy to bet anything. Um,
I was
so
gonna say he seems very interested in just getting to showdown,
yep,
so that seems perfectly reasonable.
yeah. Um,
And the right hand table, pretty standard.
yeah, I mean, I think that people aren't making moves at these, most PLO 100 regs, I expect to make moves on a board like that. And so I'm usually prepared to make a three bet bluff or something. But these guys, I don't think that there's like a single reg at these tables. I think that Ellis 89 might be one, but that's it. And even then, so I'm in pretty good shape, I think. Um, so yeah. I end up raising to isolate here,
Yeah,
just
and it's a
because
small raise again.
yeah, I'm only 3xing it because I just expect to be able to take it down post flop so much just by with one bet, and I'm really I'm just sort of building a bigger pot for me to win immediately on the
Hmm.
flop. The board comes not great for my hand, but great for my range, and I think that he just check folds. Yep.
Yeah,
So, I mean, again, like I'm not making any huge moves here. I'm mostly just looking to
they're
stab
cheap
at these
moves.
small pots.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to take down these pots for cheap. I'm opening small and I'm just looking to, sort of maximize my one money without showdown. Um, his hand on the left, uh,
is so
we'll see.
pretty.
Yeah, I end up butchering it pretty badly. So the hand on the right, this is a hand where if I get raised, I'm stacking off.
Yeah,
Especially
definitely.
against their stack sizes. I just have so much going for my hand here. Um, so yeah. So this is a very dry board. Okay, so on the right, once the king hits, I'm just trying to check it down, and then, I expect that I can have the best hand here a reasonable amount of the time with ace queen. And he checks it down with me, and I win with a pair of aces.
Yeah.
So I think that's standard. I don't think that there's a lot of value in firing again on the turn. I think it folds out a lot of the hands that I was getting value from on
So
the
he's
flop.
not calling anything. I don't really see him calling much that's worse at that point.
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna like. I think it might fold out like a decent number of like ace X type hands, but I
But you
have
beat all of them.
all of those ace X type hands beat. Like there's, I beat, with ace queen and like, so much in my hand. But at the same time, I think that he can have a flush draw himself, and if I hit on the river, I can get a value bet in pretty good there. Whereas once the board pairs, I think that he's gonna fold out a lot of his weaker flush draws.
Yeah,
So if he
but
has
not
like
necessarily on the river.
right, exactly. Like if he gets there, he'll probably check crying call. So, um, so the hand on the left, I think, ends up being pretty interesting, and I wanna sort of break this down. This is a pretty standard board to continuation bet.
Yeah.
And so I do. Now when I get check raised here, this is where I sort of lose track of the hand. Now if I were if I were short here, like if I could just get the rest of my stack into a three bet, I would. I would
Yeah.
just jam, and I would feel completely fine about it, right? Um,
Yeah, because
if
you're
I
like
were,
60-40 at worst against Jack 7, right?
yeah, and I think that he's gonna have so many like hands that are like 4, 5, 6, or 8, 9, 10. There's just like, and the
Or
board
just
is
like
just,
yours.
yeah, or a hand like mine, and I crush a lot of the hands that are like mine. Um, the board is just so dry that he's not repping much here. If he has a hand like aces, even like I'm not, I mean, I'm in okay shape against that hand, but I have just a little too much to want to stick in here. My three bet would end up being to something like 30 and change, and then I need to call
Yeah.
off another 14, and then that's where I get into like sort of a danger zone. If I could easily just like, if like my three bet would be to like pot or less, I would just stick it in and look to protect the pot. And I think that I'm gonna get a fold there a decent amount of the time. And if not, again, like I'm probably flipping versus a lot of his hands. If I'm deeper, if I was like say 80 to 120, if I were like 80 plus big blinds, I think that it's a very reasonable spot
Just
to
call.
call,
Yeah.
look to pick up equity on the
Right.
turn, and then jam over the top of a turn continuation bet.
Yeah.
Um, but what ends up happening, so I recognize that I'm too deep to ship here, but I end up peeling and looking to pick up equity. but I don't realize that on the turn I sort of screwed myself and had just no chance of having fold equity on a
Yeah.
turn jam.
All you can do is call or
Right,
fold because you don't have
right.
much money left behind. SPR is like 1.5.
Yeah, so I end up, the board breaks off here. So basically, I should probably fold the flop or call and then jam like a turn that improves me. But in this spot, I was like, well, fuck, like I put myself in a really awkward position, um, where now I'm not convinced that he has two pair here that often. So I sort of leveled myself into thinking that if the river comes an ace, a jack, an ace, a king, even like a nine, I'm not thrilled, but I expect him to bluff with any sort of 4, 5, 6 type hand. So if I make two pair, or if the board bricks off, like if the two pairs, or if it's I guess the only card that I'm not
Bless
thrilled to
you.
see is like a is a 10 or a queen. I think that I can make a hero call with one pair on this river here. Just because there's just so few hands that he really reps by check raising this flop. Now when he bets the turn when the heart comes, I think that backdoor hearts is a reasonable part of his range when I have no hearts in my hand.
Sure.
So I'm gonna fold. I might fold hearts if he jams them. If it makes me two pair and he jams, it's I'm sort of
I think you
debating
got a call given the amount of money you got left.
exactly. So I put myself into a weird spot here though, because I'm not gonna have fold equity to jam over the turn, which is what I want to be able to do. If I had an extra, if I had like 60 behind here, it would be really easy to call and then jam anytime I pick up a flush draw or two pair. The only time that that's a problem is if I pick up a nine, but I think that that's going to be outweighed by the times that he might call with worse or just fold out like a hand with a decent amount of equity.
Yeah.
And so as played though, I end up just I end up like having to take the worst option, which is to try and like hero
Get it.
call a river with one pair.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like at this point, folding is probably going to be just because there's going to be so many opportunities for you to make a big mistake on the river.
mhm,
I would,
yeah,
but I want to go back to the flop for a second. Um,
sure.
if our flop raises to 38 or something like that, why? And we we think he's got a lot of junk here, and we're only in bad shape if he has exactly jacks, which is really tough because we have a jack. And since you think this guy might be a reg, I think that you know, really heavily discounts pocket sevens and pocket threes.
Exactly. Yeah.
If we know we're at worst, a 60-40, we have some fold equity now. Why is it that big of a deal for us to just three bet and get it in at that point with our hand?
It's not
Especially
terrible.
given that the turn does a lot of stuff like this. Like since we had you realized the stack size situation earlier and recognized that if the turn doesn't help our hand, we actually probably should just give up. That makes me feel like getting in on the flop is a better idea than trying to, maneuver like this given our stack sizes. Like, we need to be. I would argue that the stack depth range where you can't just three bet and get it in starts at, 80 BBs or whatever, but anything under that, it's probably better off for you to just get it in now than it is going to be to make some really difficult and possibly bad decision, on a brick turn.
Right. And I would basically say that my response to that would be that I suffer from fancy play syndrome.
Okay.
I'm used to being able to play in situations like this where I'm able to make better decisions on later streets than my opponents.
Yeah.
Now I haven't played shallow in a while, so I sort of just put myself in a weird spot, and I don't manage to figure out a way out of it. So it's definitely my fault here. I think that you're correct. It's just that the uh, you know, I don't really have any reads as to what this guy's check raising range is.
Sure. Yeah.
And so without a read, I tend to take a more cautious play. And I thought that there was some chance that he could check raise the flop and then just give up on a turn if I call.
Hmm.
Which I've seen people, especially like I think that when I played the hand, I didn't really have a read as to what sort of player this guy was.
Okay.
This
Okay.
is the first time that we played a hand.
Hmm.
So if he sees this as a good board to make a play at, I think that makes me want to sort of float a check raise here, but I think that I'm just I just don't play the hand well. I kind of level myself into thinking like, oh, well, this is an attackable board. Like this is a play that I would make with a really wide range of hands,
Yeah.
and so he might do that too. Which is just bad thinking. I'm just not like basically I just play the hand poorly.
And then this river comes.
Yeah, this is like the worst river in the world. I think that this is a trivial fold, like because all of
Oh
his, yeah, like all of his
yeah.
like his like 8 9 10 hands get there. Any backdoor flush draw he has gets there. If he had like a random jack like my hand, then there's a good chance that he has two pair.
Right.
I'm just not,
And
like
at that point, I think it's pretty unreasonable for him to assume that a third bet is going to get you off of whatever you called the flop and turn with, given the stack sizes left.
right, yeah. So, so again, I basically just play the hand badly. I think that jamming the flop is probably the best way to play it, but I just hate when I'm not the one to put in the last bet
Yeah.
in a situation when I am light. So that was why I was
But
planning
I
on
think I
feeling
mean, it
really jamming.
effectively is really, because when you make that, I guess my thought is if you're under 80 BBs or whatever, like at your stack depth especially, like there's $14 left behind when you make that pot raise on the three bet,
Mhm.
and he knows if he puts another cent in, he's got to put his stack in, and that he
Right.
has no fold equity. So I feel like effectively it's the same, it's close enough to the same thing that it probably doesn't matter in this spot.
Well, see, the thing about that is now, again, this is just me like leveling myself, but if he's a good player and he knows that he can make a small check raise to induce me to ship with a really wide range, at that sort of stack depth, then it's profitable for him to do that a decent amount of the time because to put my stack in there, I need something like 40 plus percent equity.
Yeah.
And if he can just, it's not hard for him to be on the good side of a 65-35 there. So if he starts check raising with a hand,
Well, is it? I mean, common. What hands can he actually have there that have you crushed, and how often does he have
he's
them?
not going to have me crush, but he can force me to, he can force me to put in more money than I should. In a spot where, like I I
But
guess
he can
that
only do that with jacks, really. I mean, that's the only hand I can see him having here a lot, and even that's discounted because you have a jack in your hand.
right. I mean, if he has like a jack and a wrap though, he has me in pretty bad shape. If he has Jack 7, I'm like
You're probably 60-40, maybe
I
a
think
little bit better.
I think I'm like a 6 I think it's like a 65-35. I'd have to pro poker tools it to be honest. On like super dry board textures like this with not much, I'm not sure. I mean I basically have like 11 and a half outs with my backdoor flush draw. So, and the other thing is I don't know. I mean, I guess that when I don't, the other thing that sort of, again, like I'm like my counter level here was that um I was like, well, like I can call and jam on a turn that provides me equity because I think that he's doing this light. But then at the same time, I was like, well, I actually don't know what he's doing with this. With it's like I have no reason to believe he's doing it light. Like I don't know. I just didn't have a good read on the situation, and so I ended up playing the hand kind of goofily.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
I think that
against exactly Jack 7, we have 36% equity.
right. Okay. So and then like I would be making a small mistake to stick in my stack there.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I guess that and the thing is though, I just don't know what his range is.
Mm.
So I just, end up sort of leveling myself into a bad decision. I think that peeling the check raise and jamming a turn when I pick up equity is probably a reasonable play. Just because a lot
Sure.
of the cards that provide me equity, like a king or an ace, aren't necessarily they're going to be cards that he's going to barrel on, or, a diamond. And they're not going to, like he's going to have to commit in a spot where he is all of a sudden like in bad shape. So I think that I probably have the pot odds to call versus a lot of his hands and then just give up on the turn when I don't improve.
Mhm.
So I think that, at this stack depth, I think that might be a better play. But at calling the turn is probably a spew. I just sort of I don't know. I was like, wow, this is like the driest board ever. Like, what could he be doing this with? Like, his hand looks so much like a weird draw, or So I don't know. I just play the hand badly.
Just one more equity piece. We actually are a 62-38 favorite over Jack 10-9-8 on the flop.
Hmm,
So really the only hand that we're worried, I mean, Jacks obviously, and Jack 7 we're not doing great against.
right.
Um, but that's about it. So
I guess yeah. So I guess if that's the case, like if we say that his range is going to be like Jack 7 or Jacks, I like peeling and then jamming any turn, because on a if he continues to bet an 8
Queen.
or 10 river, or I'm sorry, turn. The only like I think that I could I mean, like, even on the queen, like, I pick up a gutter.
Yeah.
So I think that calling and jamming like any non like 8 or 10 turn is probably best against his range.
Hmm.
So yeah, it ends up being a close spot though.
Yeah.
So, and again, like, I openly admit I just didn't play the hand great. I haven't played enough shallow to avoid a situation like this where, again, if I were a little deeper, I think this hand would have gone down differently. I would have just folded the turn to the second barrel. Um, and if I were a little shallower, I would have just jammed the flop or jammed the turn. But, as played, I think that I just play the hand, not great.
It's all
So,
good.
yep.
So all right, I think that's gonna call it a session here. We didn't get through a ton of hands today, so we apologize for that, guys. But hopefully we went through enough stuff about the general theory behind shadow stack play that it was useful for everyone. We'll finish this video for the rest of episode 8 and then get into some more actual shallow stack situations. So, Kevin, you have any last minute thoughts for this one?
Yeah, I do actually. In our series description, we promised engineering humor, and we have
Oh
not
yeah,
yet provided. So I just want to get some in real quick before the end of the video. So two hydrogen atoms are walking down the street, and the first one bumps his head and goes, "Oh crap! I think I lost an electron." And the first one goes, "Are you sure?" And the second one goes, "Yeah, I'm positive." Come on!
I I laughed. I did. I just
Oh, that's my
no.
favorite.
So
All
everyone in the comments for this week, please tell Kevin how great of an engineering humorist he is, and write
I
in your
am
your best engineering jokes.
I am no riverboat king apparently. All right, I'll try harder next time.
All right, guys. We'll see you guys on the forum next week for the last episode of the season. So this is Noah Man Del Crosby for DeucesCracked.com.
See you on the forums.